science, explains many things, but it's not the ultimate answer yet. At least the science hasn't reached the point that we can know everything about what is beyond death and if there is anything there, right? So we don't know that. When somebody is dying, right, or an organism just died, right, it's not decomposed immediately, right? It's not mummified immediately. There is something still there. And then they found that the tissues that are harvested from donors, post-mortem donors, they get certain interesting features in them, the cells change. They're not dead, right? The cells change in a certain way. They get invigorated, so to say, right? Maybe the stress of dying kicks in something in that.
So these cells, after someone dies, these cells are gaining opportunity for a new function. What's up, y'all? Welcome to the show. Today's episode is a scientific discussion with Dr. Alex Pojitkov, and we tapped into a lot of different things, but I found him when his name showed up in an article discussing the third state and how cells are actually continuing to be activated after the death of an organism, aka after we die, cells still show activity. He was a pioneer of this research, and it prolonged into other research by other doctors and scientists, and we tapped into that because it was a very fascinating discussion talking about how organisms can die, and maybe we continue on. Doesn't prove the afterlife, but we theoretically discussed it scientifically and how near-death experiences play a role in this and how you can maybe structure theories and ways to prove near-death experiences. It was kind of above my head because I'm not smart enough to understand any of this, but he's such a fun guy. We had many different scientific discussions around the conversation of death and other facets of the conversation, so I hope you enjoy this conversation. It was definitely a fun one. We're not talking about grief or anything too sad, I promise you that. I hope you enjoy it. As usual, thank you for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button wherever it is on your screen, and thank you for joining the show. Take care. My topic, I talk a lot about grief, death, and many different facets.
You can touch upon that too in some way.
Yeah. I mean, it all kind of, especially your myeloma research, that obviously ties to death in lives in general. So I'm fascinated in that. So I think we'll talk about that and whatever you're comfortable talking about in your research with that. And then you also mentioned, I guess, past interviews about how that relates to the scientific framework. And when you mentioned that, was that specific with the near-death experience conversation, or was that you have anything else in mind?
Well, what I was, before I knew about your podcast, I used to watch, quite a number of videos from Julie, the nurse, hospice nurse. And, things that she reports, I mean, this is fascinating, right? So it goes beyond science, right? And of course you can say, oh, these are hallucinations or whatnot, but it doesn't seem to be that it is just some kind of a hallucination, because those things seem to be consistent. And to me as a scientist, I'm of course very open to understanding that science, explains many things, but it's not the ultimate answer yet. At least the science hasn't reached the point that we can know everything about what is beyond death and if there is anything there, right? So we don't know that.
Right.
And those things, what she reports, and I don't think these are sort of made up stories. It seems like it's all true and legitimate, and you hear this. So, and this is borderline between science and these experiences that I think, it's fascinating to me. And then in our article, we actually reported on, it was not our work, right? But we cited, the work was called Awareness During Resuscitation. So that awareness during the resuscitation was a series of interviews with about, I think 20 survivors of cardiac arrest. And, they report certain common themes. Like, we heard of this tunnel, whatever. They actually don't seem to report on the tunnel, right? But they seem to report on things like you feel reevaluation of your life.
So like AKA maybe some people call that life review.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of like life review.
Okay.
And then also feeling of going home. And this was consistent. And it's, I talked to the lead author of that research, and I said, well, what if it was like they watched TV, and then they sort of remembered those things, and this is what they saw again, replayed in their head. Said, no, it was such a diverse group, different religions, different cultural backgrounds. So it's unlikely that they were all seeing same YouTube, so to say, right? Or same TV
That's
shows.
literally what I was saying yesterday. So I had an interview with a woman who Dr. Mary Helen Hensley, and she had a very fascinating near death experience. And one of the things I said, I don't know, I forget if I said to her or conversationally to a friend, but it was something along the lines of all these people are saying the same thing. And it's either, and I feel like once you see those patterns, it's either, what is everyone colluding? Is everyone hearing one story? You know what I mean? It's like, it's one grand conspiracy, but I keep seeing a lot of those consistencies.
Yes.
And when you said feeling of coming home
Right.
and what I said, the life review, those things are common themes that come up. And to me, I mean, again, when I speak, I like to, it might come off as my beliefs, and some of them are, and some of them I just
Right.
like to challenge them for the sake of conversation. But to me, I believe in that stuff. And again, I am not coming from a scientific background, which I find with your work fascinating, having that mindset, because I don't know how many, you know, it seems like a natural reaction for you to say, okay, science isn't absolute because you continue to find new information. But that's a great perspective with this conversation, because once you see the same stories that are different stories, but they all have these common themes. And my mom, like you said, with cardiac arrest, she went into cardiac arrest,
Right.
and she had an experience. And when she said she was over there, whatever that means, and she's like, I don't even know what the hell it was, but she felt like it was home. She was good.
Yes.
So how does that? We had this whole plan of where the conversation was going to go. We're just going to go with it. But that scientific framework, what does that mean to you? Because from hospice nurse Julie and Penny and Hadley that I've had on the podcast, they call it visioning, for example, like that when they're close to dying, they see loved ones.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to you? Because from my understanding, it's not even confirmed as to what that means. Like you said, it could be hallucinating, but it seemingly might not be. It might be something else. How do you determine what's real?
Well, that's a great question, because we don't know, right? For instance, my mom, she passed away about 2 years ago, and she was at a certain point, you know, she lived with us here in the U.S. for a couple of years. I brought her back from Moscow. You know, I'm originally from Russia, from Moscow.
Yeah, we should probably introduce you.
Okay.
But sorry,
Sure.
go on. No, continue. We'll get there in a second.
Right. So I brought her in. She was declining. She was already quite old. You know, she was declining. She came here. And then, you know, she had some things like I cannot get up. I cannot eat, you know. And it was frustrating to me because I saw how my grandma was dying back in the 80s. And then I thought, no way, you know, if my mom is going to do it. I said, look, Mom, we're not doing it that way. You know, we're in America. We'll try the best, you know. And then if you eventually kill over, fine, you know. But you need to be active until the very last minute. Mm-hmm. And then it was to a certain point that I had to bring her to some facility. And then she refused to eat for 2 days. And then she had these things, you know, she saw her mom, you know, everything. But then eventually at that facility, she started eating and she perked up and gained weight.
Right after that experience?
Yes. And then, you know, she recovered and she lived then she went back to Moscow. We found her a nice reconvalescence place. I thought she would live 10 years. You know, she was very happy. She was planning to come back for a visit. And then she died in 6 months of a stroke. But she died very actively. She even got a little job in that facility. She was teaching something, you know, and it was not like old folks' home. There were young people. It's reconvalescence, so it was not for just old people.
What was her experience? What happened? Do you remember what she saw or felt?
She saw, like, she was imagining, or she was saying, "Oh, I'm coming from school. I'm like, I finished my homework and I cannot see my mom. My mom just told me to meet her somewhere and she's not there." Well, then I would say, well, if you don't eat for 2 days, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you going to
imagine? That might
right?
stir things up.
And some of these can be happening during the dying process. But why did my mother see her mother, right? Mm-hmm. She was, you know, if she didn't resume eating, she would die for sure. She was, what, how many pounds was it? She was like 40 kilos. I don't know, 80 pounds.
Oh God, yeah.
It's just like nothing.
Yeah, that's nothing.
So I think when the brain is shutting down, when the body is shutting down, you start seeing those things. But it doesn't mean that this is something random. Mm-hmm. It's maybe that your consciousness is now consciousness, you know, or conscious. transitioning into something. It's about to leave the body, right? In her case, it kind of reversed for whatever reason. But
Fascinating.
you see also people in cardiac arrest, they're not dead yet. They are clinically dead because there is no pulse, there is no spontaneous breathing, but they're still not quite dead yet. So, and that was sort of the whole idea when we're starting recording, or we're already
We're
recording.
kind of rolling right now.
Okay.
We'll figure it out. But yeah, guys, you guys, for everyone listening right now, we were just having a conversation and kind of worked right into it. So now we're talking. So here we are. It's all good.
Okay.
Everyone that's listening is cool. But this is all fascinating stuff.
Right.
So please.
So I would say, you see, these ideas of when somebody is dying, right, or an organism just died, right? It's not decomposed immediately, right? It's not mummified immediately. There is something still there. And I was very curious about that since about 2004, about that time. What is happening with cells and tissues, and what is happening, or even brain maybe, in an organism that just died, right? And I remember me and my colleague Peter Noble, we're friends too, and we used to work at the University of Washington. And at the end of the day, we often would go to the faculty club for a couple of beers. And, we first discuss our science that, we're paid to do. And then we would go on to tangents, right? And say, hey, Peter, what would happen if, we study gene expression or activities in a just freshly dead body? And you say, well, why would you want to do that? So I'm just curious, right? He said, yeah, it might be fun, why not? And of course, this is a type of science that is not like when you write a grant, you have to have a hypothesis and why you're doing it and why. In this case, why not?
Okay, that's the hypothesis. Yeah,
right. This was sort of I would say medieval type science. Oh, I have this. Why don't let's open what's inside, right?
Right.
Pure curiosity, and this was driving this research, like pure curiosity. And then about a few years later, I ended up being a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And the Max Planck Institute works very different from academic institutions in Germany or in the US. So there is a research budget, right? And if the director finds that this topic is interesting, you'll do it. You don't need to apply for grants, right? So, and then Professor Tautz at that time, he was my actually PhD supervisor a few years prior to that. He said, okay, well, why don't we take a look at it? And then we studied zebrafish. This is aquarium fish. You probably saw it. It's tiny, kind of gray fish like this size and with kind of stripes. Yeah, and mice. So, and then we sacrificed them, of course, right? We didn't wait until they die naturally. So we sacrificed them and kept them in natural conditions. Like fish would be in aquarium at 28°C, and mice essentially left on the workbench, right? So, and then the question was, okay, so now we're going to take these individuals. There were several individuals. We're going to take them at certain time intervals and see what gene activity you get there, right? And of course, first thing you would imagine, okay, maybe just everything sort of decays, right? No activity and whatnot. But surprisingly, we found about 500 genes in each species, the zebrafish and mice, about 500 in each species, go through a peak of activity. So it's around 12 to 24 hours.
And there's still activity 12 to 24 hours after death.
So they go they're like low, and then they go up, and then they go down.
What is that activity exactly?
That's the amount of. Okay, so let's do a quick biology course.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Quick biology.
Bear with
course.
me, people. Bear with me. Yeah.
So you know the chromosomes and the DNA, right? The DNA is a blueprint. So it has all the genes, and it's like a work order. All of this needs to be done, right? And then there is a second layer, so to say. It's called mRNA. mRNA is taking this information and then ordering the cell to produce proteins based on this, right? So, and we were measuring the level of mRNA. So the activity that the cell reads the blueprint and then says, okay, we're going to make this and we're going to make that. Okay. So, and then the amount of this mRNA is proportional, so to say, to the activity of a gene, right? So, and then these 500 genes, they kind of show the peak. Not all of them the same way, but they kind of went through a peak.
Okay.
And it shows you that, well, it's probably not some kind of artifact that, of course, if they all went up or all went down, it's not that interesting. But if they go through a peak, so there is something there, And of course, in the natural conditions, if you put a body in the ground, it goes through the peak and then everything decays, right? But in this case, we thought, okay, we were able to sample it, and then we see something's going on. And the curious question will be, what if you catch these tissues and cells at this state? What can they do? What if you give them more nutrients, right?
Okay.
What if you provide, try to sustain them in some way,
So
right?
you're trying to sustain these specific cells that are peaking?
That's what we thought, but we didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is sort of, this was the third state. That was the paper that we wrote, was suggesting that, heck, why not? Maybe this could be done. And one of the co-authors of this one, I'll talk about it in a minute. So but the first very sort of exciting finding for us was that it's not just the cessation of all activity. No, there is some gene expression activity that goes through a peak, and then this means that these cells are doing something. So they haven't got the news that we're all dead, right? They're still, maybe they're trying to survive on their own. Maybe there's just some residual activity, right? We had an analogy. So if you have some old car, for instance, sitting and rotting somewhere, it's maybe it could happen that the windshield wipers will start for a few minutes, right? Some contacts will be established due to just the decay, right? Could be, but that's what we found. And after this finding, I was always a little, the whole data analysis and measurements, I was always worried, what if there is a mistake, right? It sounds sensational, right? And we had so many jokes. People were joking tremendously. They were trolling us. Oh, these are the soul genes, These are the genes of the soul, the genes of immortality. There were so many jokes. And, we were joking along, maybe.
Is that coming from the scientific community?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Our colleagues at the Max Planck.
Yeah, there you go.
And yeah, sure. And, we made it light, we were also joking, yeah. We called it death genes, right?
Sensational. Yeah,
sensational. And, we sent it to a few journals, and they wouldn't take it. They said, this is just practically BS, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we were at the point we just kind of gave up. We put it in something called bioarchive, so you can put anything there. Well, as long as it is properly written, but you just put it there, and it's like an internet sort of archive that anybody can read. So we put it there and sort of forgot about it.
Okay.
But in a few months, we see in a science magazine that is really fancy, They would never even look at our paper,
Yeah.
But somebody wrote a perspective with a picture of a dead mouse. Said, hey, this weird research. Some weird research, right? They found activation of genes post-mortem, a few hours, up to 4 days. We studied this post-mortem things up to 96 hours, right? Okay. Of course, by 96 hours, there's not much. Almost nothing happens there. Okay. But... And they say, it's kind of weird research, it's curious. And then they put it. And then we started getting requests what is that? What's going on? And then we submitted to a good journal. Open Biology at the Royal Society. The Royal Society is pretty fancy. Michael Faraday published there way back when.
Wait, so I'm sorry, maybe for getting there, I don't mean to cut you off, but what did they see that reignited this research that you did? What was it? What changed?
I think, they saw that the measurements that we made, they were all consistent, right? So the research we've done, the measurements and then the whole experimental part was not wrong, right? The findings were bizarre, right? Findings were against expected outcomes, right? And then also when we would send it to other German journals, they would say, oh, what's the purpose of it, right? Well, why are you studying that? Something like that, oh, that's not interesting. We don't need to publish this. But nobody ever said that we had like errors or mistakes. So, and by the way, it's a good advice to, if there are some young scientists listening to us, if you see a paper in a kind of a low impact journal, don't discard it, because it could be really something interesting that fancy journals wouldn't take, because they think, it breaks some dogma, contradicts some dogma. We don't want to publish it. It's too risky for us, right? So even in some not so high journals, you can find great research.
And isn't that, I mean, that's what, again, I'm not a scientist, clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the way I'm dressed. But that fear of, like you just kind of alluded to about, I think that goes across the board, not just scientifically in any institution or beliefs in general. The fear of like potentially breaking a dogma or some kind of, some kind of firm paradigm, no matter what it is. It's like, especially this day and age, and putting it in the public of contradicting anything that's mainstream or a paradigm or whatever you want to call it. It's like, but isn't that science? Like, isn't like, it seems to be a fear just to question certain things. Like how much of a challenge is, I'm veering off the subject. I don't want to veer off. I want you to continue, but I was just like, that clearly plays a role in even something like this, where people are fearful of picking things up that break the mold.
Well, I would say it's yes and no. It's checks and balances, because if you start if you start believing in just anything, right, then it will open doors for a lot of pseudoscience, right? A lot of so it is good to have skepticism. It is good to challenge things that potentially destroy these dogmas, and it will be always difficult. If you're doing some revolutionary research, be ready to suffer.
Yeah. I mean, it's a dogma for a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the dogmas, they are useful in a way because they're stable, right? These dogmas, they make everything comfortable. We know this works this way and so on and so on. Good. It is practical, it's applicable, great. And now somebody is trying to break the dogma. What if you're trying to break it just for the sake of breaking?
Right. Right. But at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure there's people that do that all the time. Like they're just trying to cause a nuisance, and it's pseudoscience and it's bullshit, whatever. Sure. But like, isn't the bullshit easily diagnosed based on the research? Like, okay, even if someone wants to take a stab at it, it's completely wrong. Can you just like look at the research and be like, oh no, this is bullshit. But it's like, okay, well they tried, whatever, it's bullshit. But you can like prove the bullshit, can't you?
Well, that's why there is a resistance. That's the way how they're trying to challenge you.
Got it.
So you have peer review, for instance. They read, and then of course, I've seen many times in my other publications, not just this, somebody from the competing field just simply doesn't want you to publish this, or they don't like you.
Yeah.
And then they're gonna write some scathing criticism. Okay, but we'll respond to it. And if you respond point by point, what can they say? It's like a court, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You give arguments, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And you see, again, it worked out. Yes, we struggled with various journals, and then they wouldn't take it. But we put it out there, and somebody found it.
Right.
Of course, it could have happened that nobody would ever find it, or people would be so skeptical. I try not to think about it because I think if there is something interesting, people will find it.
Right. And so back to, I veered you off track a little bit. So when these people found your article, your research later on, what happened from there? Like, was it proven further, or was it just like an interesting conversation?
Great question. So then we published it in Open Biology, right? And I was still, myself, I was, of course, questioning, right? What if there is a mistake? What if there is something? What if there is something wrong with the data? But then, great stuff. We cited them in this publication. We'll talk about it in a minute.
Nice.
They did a very interesting research, quite similar to what we've done.
So they picked up where you left off. That's amazing. That's the beauty of findings. That's the beauty.
They cited us. They saw it, and it was 2021. Several years later, they took post-mortem human brains.
Ooh, went from zebrafish mice to a human brain?
Yeah.
That's a big jump. Okay.
That's a big jump.
Yeah.
But human brains are available, right?
Yeah, yes.
So
hopefully not mine, but yeah, go on.
Well, if you donate your brain to science, it will be available too.
I'm happy. I'm an organ donor. I'm happy to donate my brain. Yeah. I'll talk to my mom about that one before we.
You have a consent, and that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
So, But they did a very interesting thing. So they would harvest these brains, they would do some slicing, and then keep it up to 24 hours, again, on like a surgical table, so to say, sort of at room temperature. It's sort of simulating post-mortem interval, right?
Interesting.
But it is at room temperature, not in any kind of physiological, so just on a
Just a brain.
surgical, yeah, just a brain,
like
or
a bra-
slices of brain.
Is that
or
is like a
something
brain? What's a brain in a vat? Is that like what does that mean?
What is that?
You ever heard of a brain in a vat? I might be making this up.
What
So
is
I'm
a
interrupting
brain in a
his
vat?
very well-spoken words, and I'm just making shit up.
Well,
Go on.
I'm not a native English speaker, so
No,
I'm
no,
not,
I barely am too, so it's okay. It's okay. All right, so there's a brain on the table.
brain on the table,
Okay.
slices of it, and then they also studied gene expression in time intervals, right? And they also stained these brain slices to see what kind of cells are there. So they found, again, a fraction of genes getting activated throughout this time. So that was the first thing I thought, oh, great, at least if it's unlikely that we both made the same mistake, and they used a different technology to measure gene expression. So it was just good.
That's awesome. Okay.
Second, they found that although neurons really degrade quickly, but other cells, microglial cells and astrocytes. So microglial cells, they're like it's sort of immune cells in the brain. They deal with defense, and astrocytes, they provide nutrition to the neurons. They start outgrowing. It's called outgrowing processes. So it's like kind of how would you say it? Some tentacles. They start growing them a little bit. So throughout this time, these cells apparently they have enough energy in them, enough oxygen that comes through the air, that they can still do something. So now evolutionary biologists, they would ask you and me, and at that time when we studied it, they also asked us, so what's the purpose of it? Why evolution? Why was it evolved? Well, there is no answer for that. It's probably not even evolved. I mean, it could be a side effect of something that already exists, side effect of life, so to say, right? And again, it's an interesting question now. What if we take these cells in this state and then let them maybe culture them? What would they transform into? That is still my question. There is no answer to it yet. Okay.
But, so are you guys in the process of extracting those cells and cultivating them? And
not really.
well, when you say cultivate, does that mean like we mentioned before?
Culturing,
like
culturing.
Cultivate,
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Does that mean like when you said nutrients and trying to
giving them
keeping
nutrients
them alive
to see what would happen, right?
Yeah.
So that is the question that I would like to pursue later on. And then, so here is the paper that I don't know if people can see.
Yeah, we'll
it.
pop that in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the paper in the article in the conversation that you read, it was a perspective, sort of popular perspective to our paper in physiology. So in this paper in physiology, this is the artwork that we designed with the artist.
I'm going to need to buy a copy of that. Where the hell do they still sell it?
Well, you can probably get it from the journal itself.
Okay,
they gave me one copy.
And I'm not, that wasn't me fishing for the copy. I was like,
Right.
that art piece is cool.
So, and then this is our artwork that myself, Peter Noble, and the artist from the magazine designed. So the physiology actually wanted to put it as a cover page.
Put it to the camera. So what for anyone watching? If you're not watching on YouTube, this is a good reason to watch it, I guess.
Yeah.
What the hell does this mean? This almost looks like ancient civilization, and what is going on
Well,
here?
it shows, I would say, like multiple levels of life, right? So on the very bottom, you have like very molecular level, right? It's kind of like oil almost, right? And then you have proteins and whatnot. And then you go higher and higher, cells, tissues, then you have organs, and then finally organisms. And you see here, we open it here like this
Is it tentacles?
yeah, it's like when you open it a certain layer, what if something can come out of it? If you catch the life in this state, well, what if something can come out of it? So that is still a question we're trying to figure out.
So is it? I know you mentioned when you first started this research, it was just pure curiosity.
Yes.
So as you continue to unravel this, as other people maybe start pigeonhole from you, is there any foresight of? I know the article kind of mentioned it. What is the potentiality for what this might mean? Like, what could come from this outside of just information and data? Like,
great question. So now, what happened later? This paper in physiology is a result of the workshop that was organized by Professor Chandan Sen from University of Pittsburgh, because he was working in regenerative medicine, and then they found that the tissues that are harvested from donors, post-mortem donors, they get certain interesting features in them. The cells change. They're not dead, right? The cells change in a certain way. They seem to get they get invigorated, so to say, right? Maybe the stress of dying kicks in something in that. And so they started studying that, and then that research was funded by Templeton Foundation, and then they discovered us. Our earlier pioneering paper, I would say, I can brag about it to say it was pioneering, because nobody discovered this gene expression post-mortem before us, I believe. So nobody at least pointed it out.
That's so fascinating.
So, and then, but what are these genes that are coming into play, right? This is really bizarre that these genes are involved in embryogenesis. So it's embryogenesis, like, what happens in uterus, right?
Okay.
The embryo is developing. So you would think in this dead body, these tissues and cells, they go back, and then they're trying to engage into this embryogenesis. Like, why, right? But you would say it sort of jolts them back into some action. In normal conditions, nothing happens, right? Because if it is in the ground, it will decay.
It just eventually
Right.
stops.
But the potential application of this jolt, right, and this survival capabilities of these cells, the idea, at least what Templeton Foundation thought to use, is for regenerative medicine.
Interesting.
And this is how we learned about Professor Chandan Sen and then his group, and then that's how we wrote this paper together. So it's a review of our and other findings in the postmortem organisms.
So my understanding that I think I also read in the same article and
Mhm.
also what you sent me. So these cells are getting a jolt after someone dies. These cells are getting an extra jolt and showing activity after postmortem. And I have read something that said, I mean, you kind of just explained it, but
Mhm.
again, I'm trying to pace myself here. These cells are gaining opportunity for a new function, and is that new function what you said about the regenerative medicine? Is that the new
It
function?
seems so.
And it's all theoretical at this point?
No, it is. It
That-
seems practical,
It seems
right?
practical.
So because Mike Levine, for instance, from Tufts University, they did some interesting experiments where they would disassemble frog embryo. Essentially, the frog embryo would die in this sense. So you break it down into individual cells. But these cells, as they're broken down, they regained a function of getting together again, clumping, and then having their, like, this little hair that allow them to move the fluid there. So they called them xenobots. So these little clumps of cells gain some activity of moving around and collecting other separated cells, gathering them together and letting these other cells also to aggregate and behave as xenobots. So how can we immediately apply this to regenerative medicine? I don't know.
And how do
Yet.
you regenerative medicine, is that like a vague term in regards to it's multifaceted in usages?
Yeah.
Like what's an example of how you would use regenerative
Well,
medicine?
of course, it's transplantation or wound healing or something like this. For instance, it's an interesting thing in terms of how do you deal with organs when you're about to transplant, right? As we found this post-mortem processes, when you take an organ out of the organism, essentially, okay, well, to this organ, it's already it's taken out of its original environments. Essentially, it's taken out of the dead body, you would say, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it was harvested post-mortem, for instance, right? So how do you deal with these organs? Do you keep them on ice, or do you keep them at 100 Fahrenheit,
Mm-hmm.
or like 37 C? So there was an interesting YouTube video about how they transplant liver. It used to be all on ice. Now there is a new school of thought. Why don't we push some oxygenated liquid through it and keep it at 37 C, right?
That logically makes more sense because that's the
See?
temperature it is in its environment, right?
And that's what they found. That there is more success keeping it warm.
Yeah, it's like you take a fish out of water, you keep it in the water to get it back to the kitchen.
But previously, you would think, well, what? I don't think that they read our papers, right? But I don't know. But practically, you see, you start considering that this liver, for instance, is not just a piece of meat, right? It's something living that, even if it is post mortem, but it still has something in it going on. So, and how do you sustain it best? Do you cool it down, or do you keep it warm? On the other hand, you can preserve blood products at liquid nitrogen temperature, and then they get into so-called suspended animation. They're completely frozen.
Right.
But then you revive them right after. I've done these experiments all the time. These cells are very viable.
And, when I first read this article, which again put you on my radar, and I saw you, it was I was having fun with it, and I understand. Like I prefaced when I posted the article, I made a video about it. I was like, this doesn't insinuate life after death in a spiritual way.
Right.
But to me, it was fascinating. I'm looking at this in maybe a weird scientific way, an uneducated scientific way. It's like, this just seems like the fact that in the scientific community and you are just questioning it, and it's coming in a biological form of life after death. It's like, okay, that's a direction that I'm fascinated in, because it might not be spiritual. It might not be, is there an afterlife? And clearly doesn't answer that question, but it's like, it's one step in that direction. Okay, like if you were to get there, I feel like this is a starting point to maybe understand where science and spirituality bridge. So maybe this doesn't get, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I'll tell you the truth. Back in 2004, that was always my question.
Science and spirituality?
But I would never admit it, right? Because
it was a little different time.
Yeah, it would say, oh no, this is out there. It's weird, I wouldn't be taken seriously, right? So I had my ulterior motives, which I never told to anyone.
And here we are, baby.
But I thought, well, we'll try this. We'll see what's going on. And these are curious questions. I'm very curious about this. And also, the spiritual question was there, which I would never admit. Now I can.
Yeah, I didn't tell him I didn't tell him publicly.
Before I wouldn't.
Yeah. So what is your perspective? Because this is an interesting transition on that question of bridging science and spirituality. Because for my podcast, when I have these conversations about near-death experiences and just shoot the breeze about the afterlife, it's a very divisive conversation.
Right.
And I don't want to use the word divisive in a bad way, but some people in the comments, y'all need to chill out because you guys are getting a little aggressive. But outside of that, because it's okay to disagree, it's like one side, which is fine either way. I believe whatever you want to believe. But one side was like, I don't see evidence. The other one just has faith or has these experiences that we talked about, like visioning. And it's interesting because those experiences can't be explained scientifically, but then there are people that want the scientific evidence, but you can't get it because we don't understand it. Therefore, they're not going to be satisfied because they don't have evidence. And the people that experienced it have their own anecdotal evidence, which isn't sufficient evidence for the people that want tangible evidence.
Right.
And so it's like a clusterfuck, excuse my French. But I'm curious to see from you in the scientific side that is interested in finding that out. It's like, so how do you even scientifically, like at this point with our information, our abilities, is it scientifically provable from what we know today? I feel like in my head, I'm like, no, because it seems all anecdotal.
This is a great question because there seems to be a dichotomy right now. You have science, you have, let's say, religion and spirituality, where those things are, people from the religious side say it's all faith. You cannot prove it scientifically. It's just all faith. And scientifically, say, wow, this is not our realm. We're not dealing with this spirituality and so on. But I would say, yeah, okay, well, about 500-600 years of scientific research that when science became, a serious science beyond like magic or something. So, but I think we're at the point that if you say it's spiritual and you cannot prove it, well, I'm not sure. If you start say it's all faith, right? I think faith is a good start, right?
Yes.
Faith will tell you, okay, it motivates me to study. But I think, why can't we design some scientific instruments that could look beyond, right? Because, and I wouldn't discount the idea that science could probably venture into the so-called spirituality. Let's think of this religiously, right? Let's say God gave us the great brain, to study the world. Okay, well, why can't we then develop instruments studying beyond practical? A lot of science is, of course, practical, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we deal with scientific research, it has to be reproducible. It has to be, it opens up our understanding, but it also ends up in practical applications that we use in medicine and in technology and whatnot. But why can't we apply the scientific methods to those spiritual questions?
Right.
And maybe we will apply and find, oh, it doesn't work. It's possible.
How what is your in theory how do you apply that? Because again, my experience in talking to people, it seems like we talked about the near death experience.
Yeah.
It seems like there's enough patterns
Mm-hmm.
to spark curiosity, to be like, okay, wait, maybe there's something, like, it might be proven, but there's patterns here that are worth looking into, whether you believe it or not. Like if you could separate the faith and beliefs
Right.
from the facts and objectivity, the facts to me are, okay, there are consistencies.
Right.
Anecdotally, which when you start mentioning anecdotally, people are already like, it's not gonna be like dismissed in court type shit. But it's like there's enough patterns to look into it. But okay, what are those? What is that protocol that you can theorize to even scientifically narrow
Right.
it down to being true or real or quantum
Well,
mechanical?
first of all, you need to collect enough data to see that to determine statistical significance, right? So, for instance, that aware during resuscitation study, they had 500 individuals, right? Only 9% of them survived, and then it was 10%, I don't know. So, and then they interviewed, how many was 20 something they interviewed.
People
So,
that had near death experiences.
yes,
Yes.
And those some of them did not even want to be interviewed. Some of them rejected the interview requests. But those and then the paper that we were citing about this awareness during resuscitation gives a nice statistical analysis of the statements that were provided, statistical analysis of whether there is a relationship between cultural and religious background and what you're saying. So there are statistical methods to analyze whether you have some random patterns or there is something consistent. So if you find something consistent, it's a first step.
So statistics separate, like on paper, step one, and then you have
Yes.
to figure out a way to either biologically or quantum physics figure that stuff out.
Yeah,
Have you ever heard of a Dr. Jeffrey Long?
No, I'm not.
So I spoke to Dr. Jeffrey Long, and he did some research on. He has a website. I think it's NDERF, letter NDERF. Forget what it stands for. It's Near Death Experience Research Foundation. Maybe that might be it. And he studied like over 5,000. I forget the number. Thousands and thousands of near death experiences. So this, what I'm trying to say is the data is, again, you have to, I guess, reconfirm his data can be skewed, whatever. I'm not
Right.
Dr. Jeffrey Long. I'm not saying that's the case. But he has a website that has all the data, and like he's organized the data, and we had a fascinating conversation about near death. So the data is already collected, in my opinion, and there's always more to be collected. Now it's just like, okay, what do you do with that data? Because even after speaking to him, it's the people that will still deny it as being possible, which in my head, I'm like, that's cool. But also, I am not someone that's gonna be like, I'm like the school of skepticism where nothing's absolute to me. It's like, okay, I have my beliefs. I feel strongly about this, but I don't know,
Right.
maybe I can't prove it. But also my thought is like, just because something can't be proven now doesn't mean it won't be proven later. And I feel like that's the basis of science. And like, I feel like that's
exactly right.
And that's what you expect. And that's why science is so fascinating to me, because your experience with this article was like the epitome of science, whereas you guys just like, all right, this sounds cool, let's do this. And then you felt like you felt the dead end, but then someone else found it. It's like, and everyone starts picking the pieces up. And to me, like today, I don't want to get like political and the public dogma of cultural perception, but it's like we're cutting people off before we get answers, just because it doesn't align with someone else's beliefs. And I feel like the beauty of science is to be open-minded and may contradict my thought and not take offense to my findings being wrong. Because like I feel like the first finding of anything, even if it gets not proven wrong, but you're not going to be able to get here without what is considered wrong, if that makes sense. Like you need that finding to get to the next finding. So everyone's contributing. And that's why I found it so fascinating about this conversation of death and just the discussion of it and just the fascination to maybe consider what's going on.
Well, we have historical precedents, right? Like you mentioned quantum mechanics, right? Quantum mechanics was considered by classical physicists as including Albert Einstein, if I'm not mistaken, there was some type of, borderline weird science because quantum mechanics essentially states that the behavior of particles that you observe is statistical, right? It's essentially you look at just distribution of them appearing, their properties. You cannot imagine like an electron or a proton, like a little ball that is somewhere, So it's completely different way of looking into this, right? And again, in quantum mechanics, you can describe those things, but it's hard to comprehend. You always want to say, "Oh, electron is a little ball," but it's not.
It's not.
So
It's like it was someone told me. I think it was Dr. Bruce Lipton.
Yeah.
He was the first person that really explained to me about atoms. You go to a science book and it has a photo of an atom,
Right.
but then when you actually look at a photo of an atom, it's like there's nothing there. You can't see it because so it's all confusing. It's all confusing to me. But there's this invisible world to me that's so fascinating. I love how you're coming from a scientific perspective
Right.
and just not dismissing it
No.
and find interest in it. So
I used to be dismissive of this a lot.
what shifted that?
I guess age. I was, I was a product of Soviet. I was, grew up in Soviet Union, but I saw the very end of it, right? And then, of course, I studied. I'm a chemist, by the way. By my education, I'm a chemist. So I did chemistry, physical chemistry, and I was extremely dismissive of all these interesting studies like that. And I thought, we're just gonna do something what mainstream, cool, get a career and boom, be a professor. So, but then I realized what I prefer in science and actually in all my activities, I like to play, right? Not gambling, but I like to play. I have even a home laboratory where I do all sorts of experiments, things that I find curious. I'm just interested, right? And then when you're allowed to play, then you start thinking, oh, maybe you don't have to do just mainstream, right? Maybe you could do a little bit to the side. Who is to say? Of course, it can damage your career, right?
And if you really ruin your life professionally.
If you start getting out there, and if you're starting to claim with authority that you discovered something and it's not reproducible by anybody, then sure, it's a death sentence to your career.
But is there a way of finessing the way you're saying? Like, listen, I'm not saying this is so, but I found this. This is interesting.
Yeah,
Let's look
and I say, hey, reproduce it.
Yes.
Look, whatever we published throughout my career, always the data are available. They are shared, and then we had few requests right after we published this death genes research, right? This post-mortem gene expression. We had skeptics, and they say, "I'd like to see your data. You're wrong." I said, "Please go ahead." So the data were, although they were even shared at the journal website, right? We still even helped them say, "Oh, this is the format. This is the table. Has this and that. This is the raw data. Go ahead and reproduce it. Go ahead and reanalyze it," because if you, as a skeptic, can confirm what I found, boy, that's very
that's it.
That's
the way the dialogue should go, in my opinion. Again, culturally today, it's like when someone presents a fact that's against the other, they just say no, as opposed to this is what I found. Like it should be more collaborative. This is what I think. Then if people are getting shut down with what they're saying without saying certain words right now, it's like you know what I mean.
Right.
It's like we're saying certain words instead of just dismissing. It's like, okay, have a conversation, show each other's data, talk about it.
Compare.
Why is this wrong? Why is that wrong? And try to come to a mutual understanding. If you can't, that's okay too. But instead of just like shutting someone off, and even in this research, and saying, "Oh, this is baloney," it's like look into it. Take the unlazy approach. And it's like look into it and give it a shot. I don't know.
Exactly. And then to me, when these other groups studied the post-mortem brains, and found these changes in cells and gene expression, that was like the best feeling I ever had. Like, yeah, I could have made mistakes, right?
Of course.
And if they were discovered, I could have damaged my career, right? Because first you have a news splash, and then somebody says, "Nah, sorry, you made a mistake." Okay, you can admit, but it's still embarrassing, right?
I can't understand. I can't understand that world because again, I'm not in it. But so this is a side question that I didn't know was going to come up. But you mentioned you were a chemist and you were in Moscow.
Moscow, yeah.
So when you were coming up there and you said there was a diversion of interest. Were you like playing around with things, but maybe there was a mainstream? What was the cultural impact living in Moscow and your scientific ambition? You're limited, like specifically limited there? Is that something you want to speak about?
No, I studied at the Moscow State University. This is, I think, it's one of uh, the best universities in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
There's Moscow State University and Novosibirsk State University. So, and a couple others. So there was not really. I wasn't really limited in anything. I just wanted to discover the new world. I thought, I'm gonna be like the pioneers. Go to America. That's all.
And you're here, baby. You did it.
First, I went to Germany. I did my
Okay.
PhD there.
Nice.
And then I just wanted to move to America. It's not that I was limited in something,
Yeah.
but I thought it would be great.
It was just more.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, on a personal level, whether
Yeah.
scientific or not, what do you think happens when we die? As a chemist and a doctor.
See, I played it in my head many times. Think when the time comes, right? Let's say I'm laying in bed. What's gonna happen? Right? I'm thinking that, like, when you feel very tired, like you're exhausted, right? You cannot like stay awake. You're keeping your eyes, and then you fall asleep, right? What I'm thinking will happen is, like, you start feeling extremely tired and fatigued. You close your eyes and you start seeing a dream. And maybe at that dream, you reevaluate your life. And you know how in a dream, there is no like time, right?
Yes, no time. Yeah.
Dream is like different things in front of you. There is a little bit of time, little sequence of events, right? But it's not like actual time there, right?
It's a different feeling.
But I'm thinking that you fall asleep like this and you start seeing the dream. And then, but for you, this dream doesn't end, right? You don't know how long when you're sleeping at night. Do you know how long do you dream? You don't, right?
Yeah.
You just kind of you wake up, and then you maybe remember your dream. But
Yeah.
how long did it last? Who knows? So I think at that point, when you're so fatigued, you cannot stay awake. You pass out. You see that dream, and maybe that dream will stay with you forever.
Right. It's like it's like an easy transition.
That's it.
That makes
And then you decay. They put you in the ground.
Yeah.
That's it.
At least the body, then worse, maybe somewhere else. Yeah.
Right.
Again, the woman I spoke to, this episode will drop after this. Yeah. So at this point in the future, I released another episode, and she had an experience where she broke her neck in a
my
car
God,
accident. So I think she was
terrible.
clinically dead in a car accident.
Yeah.
And she says the first experience before she leveled up in her near-death experience, she came out of her body and she was witnessing the scene below. And later on, when she kind of came to, I'm skipping a lot here, but she was seeing things that were happening. She saw her body, saw a woman, oddly at the time, leave a phone number on the passenger seat to, I guess, as a witness or whatever it was. Then when she finally came to in the hospital bed later, the doctor, someone shows up and she's like, "Oh, we met before. I was a police officer or whoever it was, I forget." And she's like, "Oh, we met before." She's like, fresh out of the just came to, and the person was like, "Well, no, we didn't meet." But he was one of the guys at the scene of the crime, the scene of the accident.
Yeah.
And he was like, "What?" And then she also recollected someone leaving the note on the passenger seat who ended up being a girl that coincidentally was at the crash that she knew, and that person recognized her. So she was able to pinpoint someone leaving a note with their number and the person that came to when she was almost decapitated.
Yeah.
And that person, I think it was the doctor again, but why would the doctor be there? Now I'm confusing myself. But nevertheless, she was able to point out things that happened when she was just, there's no way she was aware at the time.
Here is an excellent scientific experiment for you.
For me.
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
Well, that's what I would suggest, right?
Yeah.
So, and I heard of this idea maybe 20 years ago, but I could never find anywhere if they ever done that. So, like in this, in intensive care units, you could place maybe some signs like here, and if you have the outer body experience, and then you come back,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Maybe you could remember, because here I don't know what's there, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But if I'm above, then I could see it. That could be a great experiment.
That,
Why not to do that?
You've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yes.
So I had him in the podcast.
Yeah, I saw him on
and
your
so
podcast.
and so he mentioned something like that,
Uh-huh.
and it's like that's a good point. I think it's like a question of You have to do it a lot, in my opinion, from the stories I've heard. You have to do it a lot of times because
Yes,
you,
statistics.
you can't just like do it once. Oh, it didn't happen because
No,
not everyone has that
Oh, yeah,
experience.
you have to
So
do
you'd have to like
statistics.
even if you just got like a couple people, then it's all you need is one really. If you get one person that did it, that's like that should be enough to have like, oh shit, how the hell did they do that?
Right.
But then it's the question of I wonder like the ethical aspect. It's like how does that even work? You know, like politically of
Well, in this case, well, this is a so-called minimum risk research, right? Because if you put a sign somewhere, there is no risk.
I mean, yeah, that makes
You
sense.
you can have when you do the experiments with human subjects, you go through the IRB, Institutional Review Board. So you could say, we want to put signs, we want to put something, and then we want to ask the patients if they come back what they saw. So it's a minimal. So the risk could be like emotional harm, for instance, right?
Right.
But then again, you can go through this review process and say, okay, we will consent them to be interviewed, because they can say, well, I'm not going to be interviewed. But if you agree, then you could say, oh, did you see any signs on shelves?
Yeah, I love that.
And I think ethically it would not be a big problem,
Yeah,
because there
it's
is
minimal.
no real risk besides somebody making upset.
But then my question, it kind of goes back to something I already mentioned. Say hypothetically that that experiment that happens, we do that, and then after 100, 1,000, whatever units we get of people, and a couple of people call it out. Say we get a couple hits, people they hit it like, oh my god, this is happening.
I saw a triangle.
Yeah. We saw a triangle. We saw
Green
a
triangle.
photo of David Bowie, whatever
Right.
it may be. What then? Like, what hypothetically or theoretically would be the next step to even study further? Like, how do you? What does that mean?
Then you would start saying, okay, so where is the conscious or consciousness?
Conscious or because in this sense, where's your consciousness?
Where is your consciousness?
Yeah.
Right? Where is it?
Hold
Right?
on, I think I'm right.
Again, I'm not a native speaker. Right?
Again, barely I am too, and I've lived here.
So then where does the consciousness reside? Right? Is this in your brain? Is it in your entire body or something?
Are we receiving it?
Who knows?
Yeah.
So there was actually also Mike Levine, who is our co-author in this paper, right? They did interesting, or he was talking about interesting experiments. They worked with some small organism that you can cut in half, it would regenerate. So it would regenerate the tail, for instance.
Right.
But you can also train them to see various, you can train them to kind of recognize where the home is, like where the food is. So, but once you cut the tail and then let it regenerate, the former tail with new head still knows where the home is.
The tail does.
Yes.
So what does that tell us about awareness?
Exactly. Well, of course, you could say that maybe this information is spread throughout the body.
Right.
Maybe.
Cellularly, maybe just.
Yeah. Is this also same case for humans? Maybe not. We don't know.
Yeah. Recently, I
You
heard.
would think it's kind of in the head, right?
We normally think that, but I remember recently. Have you ever heard of dimethyltryptamine, DMT?
Yes.
So
I didn't play with it.
I've played with it before, but that's another conversation. So I think the ideas I've always heard, it was apparently, I don't know if maybe it was proven. You tell me it was in the pineal gland, but then I heard there were studies that were released that the DMT is now discoverable throughout the body. Like it's like not just in one place. It might be cellular. It might be throughout the body. So it's like, again, it goes back to my whole position on the afterlife. I believe there's something. I've heard my whole perspective has been growing because I speak to so many people, but it's like the need for proof in this world. I understand that makes sense. Like proof is nice to have. I'm just like, I still think we know shit. We know so much, but we know nothing at the same time. So
I want a proof. I want to find it.
No, of course I do too.
Yeah.
I agree. I would love to. I'm not saying I don't want proof. It's just like for me, yeah, of course I want proof too. I agree.
Would say
maybe I misspoke.
I would say it would be really sad. Like we're doing this podcast. We're playing and doing things, and then you die and nothing. This is like yeah. You cannot experience this if there is nothing, right? But it makes you a nihilist. Like, oh, why am I even bothering, right?
Right, exactly.
So I'm driven by hope.
Yes.
Right? I'm driven by hope that, maybe there is something after that. Maybe I'll be able to see the results of my work. Maybe I'll be able to still play with the universe, like somewhere, right? How do you know? Right?
Yeah, I mean, living on hope is living on faith, and living on hope is improvable too. So it's like,
right. But I'm hoping that with scientific methods,
yes,
we should be able to find the nature of consciousness. what it is.
Isn't that crazy? We don't even know what consciousness is, right?
I think because it was not a real subject of research, because, think of it, how science really took off. It was initially very practical, right? Steam engine, electricity, something to make your life comfortable. Then next level of science is more like trying to understand the foundations, theoretical physics, quantum mechanics. And then, but traditionally, those spiritual questions have never been a subject of science because, well, it simply didn't start it that way. So religion and philosophy were dealing with these issues. And now this dichotomy still persists. Religion tells you, religious figures tell you it's only faith. But I don't buy into that. I'm pretty sure that there got to be some scientific way of determining what consciousness is. And is it some emergent property of a collection of atoms when they're together? But what happens when they disappear, right?
So do you think the scientific community is, maybe there's some kind of trend of bridging science and spirituality? Like, do you think are we leaning towards that in any way?
I haven't seen serious research in that field, no.
I wonder, like,
it is because, it can damage your career.
I know, that's the crazy part. I get it. It's even like I have this podcast. If I say one thing, it's like, oh my God, then everyone just puts you in a box because.
And then they'll take it out of context and say, this guy says this, period.
And
then you're toast.
Yeah, it's exactly. Especially a podcast, people forget that we're on the fly right now. Like, I prepare, like I knew we had an idea, but it's like I don't know what I'm going to say next sometimes, which is fun. I like it like that.
Right.
But
we will cut controversial pieces out, right?
Oh yeah, I think we were pretty good. I don't think we said much, but we'll review it. But I think I don't
we
really
need to
edit
retain
much.
some controversy too for interest. Right?
Yeah, of course. And I think for people that listen to my podcast, I've said it a couple times. Like, I don't really edit much. Like, the only time I gave you permission, like I give my guest permission, like, hey, if you like make fun of someone that you do, like, oh, maybe I should take that out. I'll respect you and take it out.
Take it out.
But for the most part, I don't take anything out. So this is like all on the fly. And people that haven't done podcasts, they forget that sometimes. I think everyone thinks it's always edited, and maybe the show will be better if I edited some things out. But I just want to let it fly, and it's fun. And people forget, like, we're just talking. Like, how many times you're in the living room and you say something, and it's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way, but now we're on record, so it's like, oh shit, blah blah.
Yeah.
But hey, man, I want to thank you for doing. I don't know if there's any last words to say. If there's anything that maybe you wanted to say before we get out of here.
Okay. Well, I would give my perspective to people who consider becoming scientists.
Yes.
My personal perspective. I'm not your professor or teacher, right? But I believe that if you want to do science, interesting science, you should consider that, yes, you do some science for bread and butter, maybe like we do clinical research, this is something practically useful that needs to be done, that has immediate impact, and then you have to do it. But second, you should be always able to play. Now, in my current research, I'm not studying these postmortem things. Maybe at some point when we get some funding or something, I'm studying multiple myeloma, right, at the City of Hope. And then, we have clinical trials we're studying very interesting molecules, some of them radioactive, destroying the cancerous cells. But also, we're playing around with things like natural compounds, Again, found some paper in relatively low impact journal, but they studied garlic extract. I was always interested in garlic extract for myself, right?
Garlic
extract shows anti-cancer activity. So we're gonna try it now, right? It's very cheap to try, not expensive, but it's kind of, let's play, let's see what happens, right? And if something comes out, yes, we will do this, funding, applications, papers. But right now, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to play with things. Or another things I'm doing, atomic force microscopy. I'm poking these cells with a tiny needle and measuring their rigidity. Turns out when you give them a drug, they get kind of bedazzled. They get all soft, and then eventually they clump up and become really rigid. Where I'm going to apply it, I don't know yet.
Right.
It's an interesting reproducible finding. And then why did I start to do this? Again, what happens? And it was no real like, oh, we're going to cure cancer right now. No.
I think that's huge. I love those words because I think that's like outside of being a young scientist, I feel like we could all take that mentality as a young scientist in life and just try things. And if you're in whatever state you're in, it's good to try different things. If it's grief, if it's a breakup, or if it's just in a new job, like, try things and do it with a good intention. Of course, good intentions and with the right intention, the right mindset of it. It's like, try different things. This life is play. I think this life can be for play, and you're not going to know what's going to happen.
As long as with this good intention.
Yes. Yeah, because there's certain intent. That's why I want to specify that, because you can do things and really be an asshole. So like, do it that way. But this was so much fun. I do want to ask real quick before we was going to end. The garlic. This is an interesting question.
Yeah.
If you keep researching the effects that garlic can have, right?
Yeah. That
sounds like, the big guys might not like that because it's so cheap. Like, I wonder, like,
you can't even patent this.
Yeah, as I was saying. So it's just take garlic, and you're not gonna like do it, and it's just a recommendation.
Right. So we found that we reproduced what that paper showed. Right. They tried with some different cancers. We tried with myeloma. Boom, extract kills the cells in vitro, like in a plate.
Right.
But in a plate is one thing. Then we're gonna try with mice, and then I wanna have a feeding study. Oh, by the way. At City of Hope, I'm a part of a bigger lab. It's not that it's my lab or something. I'm part of a bigger lab, and that's kind of research. I'm just leading this garlic research there with other colleagues, right? But we want to see it first. Then after we established that it happens in the dish, then we'll try with mice, and then we'll do a feeding study. What importance is that the garlic has to be raw. None of this dried, cooked garlic. They already showed it doesn't work, so we don't want to even.
Has to be raw garlic in the clove, just ready to go.
Well,
What about pill form? So pill form won't work?
That's dried.
So dried won't work. Yeah. Interesting.
They showed it. We didn't test it, but I believe, So
those garlic pills they're not going to do anything?
I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm not going to.
Yeah, do your own research, people.
Yeah,
Look
do your own research.
We're not giving you any.
I'm not trashing any garlic pills or anything.
I was just curious because I've had garlic pills before. I like garlic in everything.
Yeah, I love raw garlic.
Yeah,
right?
Same.
And then what we're studying is raw garlic or garlic extract, right? It's in alcohol.
Got it.
So, and then we'll see.
All right. Well, to next time I'll do this, he's gonna have more research for us on garlic. That's what we're gonna say.
Oh, I hope so.
All right, brother. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I will, in case there's anything you want me to put in the show notes, I will put more information below, articles, information, so you could find him. And I want to thank you again for being on here. And until next time, guys, another episode of Dead Talks. We'll see you later. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.